we are recording this. In the past, we've made PDFs of the PowerPoints available on our website, but it has a little more context that you can hear the program. So we are recording it via Zoom, so just keep that in mind. Eric,
all right. My name's Eric Krupa. I'm from the St. Charles History Museum. I'm their archivist and curator. I live in Batavia, but I've lived in this Fox River Valley my whole life. Geneva, Batavia, St. Charles border, like border kid of all the towns, frankly. I'm going to zip this up just a little bit, just so I'll be able to click. Before we start, I just want to give a quick land acknowledgement statement that we are on Indigenous land, and it's only been a few generations removed since the forced removal of Indigenous peoples here. So we want to honor those that have always been here, the peoples who have come before, and the peoples that will later come on this land. Indigenous history is often misunderstood and misinterpreted by the Western perspective, and the actuality is humans have been living on this land as soon as it became inhabitable, and that the way we look at history is often incomplete and lacks a deeper understanding of deep time. So we will kind of move on from that. And speaking of deep time, we're going to condense about 13,000 years of history into one section of the presentation. And that just goes to show that a lot out there needs to be discovered. It needs to be, kind of documented and better preserved using whatever tools are available that are still within, respectful limits, of course. So we'll start back about 21,000 years ago. So not too crazy in the grand scheme of things, but around this time, the Lake Michigan Glacier began to recede, Laurentide Glacier from, I guess, the whole Midwest region-ish. And as it did, it began to create these piles called moraines where a glacier once moved forward, it stopped, it left a pile of debris which skidded on forward. And then if it moved forward a little more, you could have other ones. And as it receded, it left these piles of where it kind of sat for a while. And these moraines could be miles high and hundreds of miles long in some cases. Out here, if you honestly look from kind of more out by Campton Hills area, that's where you get a lot of terminal end moraines, which are where they sat for kind of a while. And it's the extent of the glacier before everything gets flattened out. Well, kind of reverse that. But it's theorized that as the glaciers receded and melted, they began filling up these large moraines, which acted as reservoirs. And this reservoir around our area was like twice the size of Lake Michigan. And around 17,000 years ago, it's presumed that the Woodstock Moraine, which is right up here in near Burlington, Wisconsin area, kind of caved in, had a huge torrential explosion of water. And within days to weeks, this whole Fox River Valley was essentially carved out with water following to the lowest point, essentially the quickest point it could get to. See there. And as we were talking about earlier, deep time, it's the understanding of not just, recent things or what we presume is recent, but going back millions of years, stuff that's nearly impossible to fully get a larger picture of, but we try anyway. And it's presumed that 98% of all human history here in the Fox River Valley has gone before recorded history. So we are literally just 2% of the whole narrative to this area, which just goes to show that, and that 2%, we only know so much of 2% in general. So it gets kind of crazy. But the earliest humans who arrived here came following the megafauna and megaflora kind of into the Fox River Valley. So these were groups of people that were out hunting in kind of like communities, large mastodons and mammoths. That sound like a Looney Tunes character. But it's theorized that they just follow them up here because they're a good source of food. As time moved on, this area became more inhabitable. So it went from being a boreal forest where it's really layered with pine trees, kind of more Arctic area vibes. And within thousands of years, it became what we kind of know as today, which is wetlands, temperate forests, as well as tall grass prairies, which once dominated the landscape out here. And humans learn to adapt and grow with the ecosystem and the nature and the different plants and animals together. So when the animals got smaller, human tools got smaller. You'll often see arrowheads and projectile points. We like to call them projectile points knives because most times they are, well, projectile points, which are the atlatl, which is like a large spear thing, kind of like a dog ball chucker, if that makes sense. So that kind of evolved and it was the primary way of utilizing things. The bow and arrow was actually introduced to indigenous communities around 3,000 years ago. So you'll see a lot of the smaller projectile points if you find those. Those are actual arrowheads. But anything larger or earlier than that is usually atlatl or a larger spear. We have several, well, several hundred projectile points and knives in our museum collection. I've had indigenous communities come over to kind of look them over, make sure we don't have anything we shouldn't have, as well as just to kind of get more people involved. And we have documented stuff from about 12,000 years ago, which is a projectile point that was found near, ooh, that one I can't remember, so I don't want to just give off the wrong answer. But it just proves that humans have been around here for a very, very, very long time. And proof of settlements, I mean, it could date about the same time, but the largest and most kind of full evidence for that is a dig at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in the 70s. There they revealed that there were 17 archaic era, so this is like 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 year ago sites that were essentially formed a community near where Aurora and Batavia and Warrenville kind of are. As I mentioned that over the time, people became more, just grew in with nature. So we'll continue going on there. So the Fox River was utilized by these early, well, I mean, it's utilized by everyone that's been here. So I don't want to say just early, but it really was utilized as the first highway to get from point A to point B. And a lot of the streams, all the watershed around this area really flows into the Fox River, with Pearson Creek being, I believe, the largest on the western side. So that was used as like a road to get to there, to get to the Illinois River, where then you could connect to the Mississippi. You could get down to Joliet. You could get down Peoria. I mean, different places across just Illinois and the further down. The population usually utilized this area for hunting in the summers, springs, and early falls before going back down. And then they would head around central Illinois and even more south. Cahokia, if anyone's ever heard of it, it's UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's one of the greatest, not preserved, but one of the largest pre-colonial civilizations that was ever discovered, with about 40,000 people living down there. And what's important to know is that these communities were all interconnected for many, many years. There were indigenous trails that were trade routes, one of which is Army Trail Road that's still being used today. And then that goes into Lake Street. And once you get into Lake Street, you go into Chicago, and there's one of the most utilized routes of prehistory, quote unquote, which is a term we kind of shift away from now. But trade sprung up around these times as well, where you have people from like the Dakotas trading out with people from here down to Florida. So these routes were really interconnected. I mean, we have obsidian pieces of projectile points in our archives, which indicates that they came from somewhere north, kind of near the Dakota area, because we don't have natural obsidian around here. It's kind of it really, you have to use a lot of different professions and a lot of expertises and a lot of specific expertises to piece together these, the whole history. Modern indigenous settlement only begins around 1600 here. This is when the Oneida kind of cultures of earlier began to, kind of join other tribes just as stuff moves forward. Be like just kind of like moving your movable neighborhood, combining with new people, meeting new people, just natural progression of things. So with that came land disputes as well, especially as some people were taking a little too much up north. Other people got pushed down here, like the Potawatomi, the Ottawa, and Ojibwa. And this was around 1690. So think of the time around the Pilgrims are kind of settled out there. And this is America's colonial era. Nobody's really cognizant of the whole way of life out here. There's only a scant few people. Most of them are French, honestly. So at this point, our area has not really been scouted, besides some French people who come around 1698. In 1722, another war breaks out between the Sauk and Fox, and they move more into and the Confederation. And that causes the Sauk and Fox to kind of take over the western portion of northern Illinois, while the Potawatomi and the Ottawa and Ojibwa are all kind of on our region, kind of around the Chicagoland area. And by the time of the Revolutionary War, the Illiniwek population had plummeted due to disease and just this constant cultural struggle battle back and forth. And the Potawatomi have become the most prevalent tribe. So we typically think of when we hear indigenous people in the area, it's always the Potawatomi. It's Potawatomi Park. It's a lot of different things associated with that. And we do want to respect that they were here, of course, but they were the latest tribe to be here in reference. So there's, as we said, many tribes that have come and gone and remain here and just will keep on being around here. As I mentioned before, the first Europeans to come into the area were French fur trappers, fur traders, and missionaries. Saint I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to give that a go. But the first British or Anglo-Saxon people to explore the area was only in 1823. So Illinois became a state in 1818. This area was essentially wild, you know, it was indigenous land, it was legally indigenous land. Um, and when the Major Long expedition came to kind of survey the Northwest, they were going up to Minnesota. They stopped along at Five Islands, which is like around the curve in the river up here by St. Charles. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the actual geology and hydrology of the river, but that area has always been known as a narrow crossing point, so it was easily forded. I've even been out there and I've seen deer ford the river right at that point because you could just step across it essentially. So this area gets mentioned a couple times throughout history, and we could kind of identify this region because of the number of like semi-permanent islands that have been there that aren't backfill islands from the dams or anything. It just makes it really interesting to think that these people were there. They wrote down that the stream was a fine stream about 130 yards, which is 390 feet, the scenery of which is varied by several islands scattered throughout its channel. For those islands I was talking about. The expedition noted how easy it was to be forded, and here's a little map of them crossing around. We're like up around there. In those aspects. We might be a little to the right, actually. But just 9 years after this expedition, European settlements really pushing in full force. The establishment of the Erie Canal in 1825 brings like our area into prominence with white settlers. Most of our settlers come from New York, actually, and most of them come from the central and western portions just because of the accessibility. And as more and more people pushed in, this created larger land conflicts, and the largest of which in this region was the Black Hawk War. And this was a brief conflict which began over, well, let's see, there's a lot behind that. So the war began over the Treaty of St. Louis in 1804, which was basically an illegal treaty. It was like three different guys, let's say they were the mayors of three different cities. They decided to cede over like the state's land essentially. So like imagine you're the mayor is like, we're going to cede over Illinois. So many people saw this as an illegal treaty. It wasn't a thing that should have been legally documented. And Black Hawk began to push back. So squatters were taking up his land that he was on, and they were actually giving him a hard time. So he decided to fight back. Unlike many different, well, I shouldn't say unlike, but many different tribes have many different strategies to tackle the English and Anglo expansion of westward. And as a result of Black Hawk's action, Winfield Scott, who was the leader of the United States troops at the time, he marched his men up Army Trail Road, which is named Army Trail Road because of that. And they went to confront Black Hawk, but they never made it in time. The war had ended and Black Hawk had suffered loss at Bad Axe. However, while they were camping on their way, two of the soldiers passed away of cholera right in John Dewar Forest Preserve. So if you're ever out over there around the bend, it's really like pretty close to the parking lot, just a little stretch away. There's this little marked off area down here, and that's just two of Winfield Scott's men who were marching along the way. The war, though, resulted in the deaths of 500 members of various tribes and 77 soldiers and settlers. And it also forced indigenous communities to sign the Treaty of Chicago, which would be yeah, which would then forcefully remove them west of the Mississippi River. And the Potawatomi were originally located in Council Bluffs, and then like 10 years later, they were once again forcefully removed in 1848. And for almost 200 years, the government had never or had not recognized indigenous tribes on Illinois land. That is until April of 2024, when the Prairie Band of Potawatomi were legally given their land back at Chabanez Reservation, which was never ceded during the Treaty of Chicago, and it was actually maintained by Shabana and then illegally sold off by squatters in the 1840s. So after that, there's a period of indigenous removal while the Western settlers are coming in. And this is where you get Evan Shelby, who is our town's first official settler, staker, whatever you want to call him. Western settler is what I like to use just because it's right in the name. Evan Shelby was from Indiana, so he was not coming from too far, but he was trying to play it safe due to the tensions of the Black Hawk War. So he didn't want to go while that was happening, and he came back out here the following year once land opened up, quote unquote. He staked a little bit of land left, went back, and then brought his family in 1834. And later that year, there were about 20 families that had joined them. So in 1834, you have like, I don't know, let's say like 70 people living here together. And a gentleman comes through named Amos Parker, who describes the Fox River, similarly to the Major Long expedition, as a clear stream of water about 20 rods wide, and a rod is about 16 and a half feet, having a hard limestone bottom from 2 to 3 feet deep, a brisk current, and generally fordable. At medium and high stages, shallow draft boats can navigate most of the river. And this is pre-dam, so we do have evidence that draft boats could actually navigate most of the river. But after some early brutal winters, the pioneers needed more than their log cabins to really create a settlement. They wanted to go from survival to being able to have a market economy. So they wanted to build framed buildings. They needed to build stuff to just, establish industry. So they decided they needed a dam, which was the hot thing at the time. It was easy-ish to do, and it would produce enough water power for you to run mills. So they had to scout a spot for the dam, and this was not easy, or I mean, this was very easy to do because there's two spots where you really have a fordable river. One is right downtown where the bridge and dam is now, and the other is over at Five Islands. So it was selected to put it near Main Street in St. Charles today, because it was an ample, low point with ample, like, uprooted bedrock where it was very sturdy, and like even through the streams you would probably have to like ford it and portage around it, but it was easy to build upon, and it had less interference with the high water upstream, so they were able to utilize the natural bedrock to build the foundation for this. In 1836 they actually created an organization to figure out how to do this economically. And three men named Ira Minor, Reed Fearson, and Bella Hunt purchased out Evan Shelby's stake in this area, but they were held to a bond, like they had to get a dam done within a certain amount of time, or else they'd have to pay $10,000 in penalties. So they really rushed to get it done. They hired a guy named Ebenezer Hooker from the Wabash region of Indiana, who apparently worked with Joseph Sibley, whose home still stands in town. So he's a good mason, a mason who assisted with the construction there. Oh, and on the left there at the top, that's Reed Fearson, and then at the bottom, that's Ira Minard. Ira Minard is not the nicest fellow, but so at this time, you were pretty much damned if you didn't have a dam, if you wanted to create your own settlement. So this is how you did it. If anyone ever needs to build a crib dam in your backyard, the original dam was essentially used by floating trees and logs that were cut from Littlewoods, which was up north near the Five Islands area, and a little kind of around that area where the water tower is by Redgate Bridge. The tops of the trees were cut off, and the trunks were all positioned forward to catch as much dirt, dust, like anything it could, pretty much to create a backage or a blockage. Men then got to work at laying the base by cutting these hewn timbers lengthwise, kind of stacking it up like a log cabin style almost. So this is where a mill would be great, but right now you're actually chopping away, taking broad axes and slowly but surely chiseling at it. Um, Observations at the Carpentersville Dam, which was just removed, noticed that a lot of stuff was staked to large stones in the river. We didn't have that issue where you needed these large stones to kind of boulder down and tack the dam into shape. They would just nail it right into the bedrock here. And that's why it's believed that this dam has survived for so long, because parts of the original 1836 dam are still actually under there. So the bedrock acted as that really sturdy base. And as they kept going, they would fill in mud, they would fill it in with slag, whatever they could pretty much have. Well, slag not yet, but eventually they would. The dam ended up being around 20 feet wide by 300 feet long, so this is a pretty large structure. It's took a lot of trees, obviously, and that's why this area, ooh, what are we at? Like, I forgot what the percentage is, so 15% or something of our normal coverage from what we once were. But after being affixed, binders of logs were then stacked upon these log cabin things, and they would be alternately stacked until they hit 8 feet high. So it's an 8 feet high, 300-foot wide, and 20-foot long kind of structure that's blocking the flow of water. No one knows, as we said, how the dam was, but it was assumed that with the bedrock and ripracking, the dam was affixed into place. So this is just pouring a ton of stuff to weigh down the dam, make it as dense as possible. It's used a lot now to as erosion prevention measures, kind of on shores. If you just see like, well, I guess even in Lake Michigan, everywhere the large boulders. Think of it at kind of smaller scale, but. Uh, Pretty much they would use whatever they could to get a ramp going in the backflow, and they would kind of have the water come up and over. The face of the dam was then kind of pounded down with clay sediment, making it as flat and as hard as possible, given wood sheet panelings, and then covered again with more stone. Additional 4 feet of gravel were then filled in, kind of fenced in the front of the dam. So this way, while the water began to block off and kind of pile up behind it. A wall of cobblestones, railroad spikes, and pretty much, like I said, everything was thrown at this dam to kind of reinforce it and kind of ensure that it would stand the test of time. And by September 1836, the dam and sawmill were completed, and shortly after, the first frame house was erected in town, as well as the first store. And this is how a crib dam looks visually without any of the face or the cement or anything over it. So if you looked behind the St. Charles Dam, this is kind of what you would see really far in there. Oh, yes.
How long did it take to build that?
It only took them a season, so 3 months, something along those lines. Because it was ready to go by 1837, I believe. And this brings up the issue of floods and the survivability of dams. A major issue with many of these early dams, as you could imagine, was them just flooding out and getting washed away. And one of the worst happened almost, well, pretty early on in the history of the Fox River, which was in 1849. And many of these floods are due to melt off and ice flows. So these ice flows really back up, they create lots of issues, and they've during the 1857 flood, which was even worse than the 1849, several people actually perished due to the flooding. And each time the St. Charles Dam was said to have made it through the floods. Every other dam on the Fox River has been replaced, except for the St. Charles Dam in some sense. And they do, as I said, credit it to the bedrock. They're not 100% sure, but if you went under there and did excavations, if they blew it up, you would see the timbers, you would see everything kind of come apart. Part four, as we mentioned, the dam. This is the first part of human interference with the river that's creating a non-sustainable method of ecological thought, I guess. And that only grows on because obviously you're not just going to put a dam in and not have industry pop up next to it. So this happy looking gentleman named Darwin Millington He was going around the country kind of setting up mills. It's in his last name. The man must have been good at it. No. And he actually said, well, I'll set up the mill, I'll run everything, and I'll buy you out for the west side of town. So he buys the whole west side of St. Charles, essentially, and starts a commercial mill. In order to start a commercial milling industry, you have to seek water power authority from the state of Illinois. So in 1840, even though they had a dam and they're ready to go, they had to go to the state. They had to get this act, which then placed ownership of the dam for whoever was going to be on one side and the other side. So this will cause problems much later down the road, and still is creating confusion to this day. But legally, the people that were in charge of the dam's upkeep were the people that lived on or operated on either side of it. So according to this dam, the dam had to be 7 feet high, contain a downstream slope that was 2 feet horizontal so that you could carry boats over it. And it had to be perpendicular and well maintained to allow for travel and trade. I don't know, do I have this on here? Either way, at this time, the Fox River was actually being considered as an extension of the I&M. So they were our Illinois and Michigan Canal. So a lot of rivers like the Fox, as well as the Rock River, they kind of, not Rock, Des Plaines, obviously, they tried to get the canal forward into their body of water. And in an attempt to do so, this one gentleman floated a steamboat in 1848 down the Fox River. And he wanted to sail all the way to New Orleans. And he made it all the way to the Illinois River before his boat actually took on damage. And so he successfully navigated the Fox, but couldn't quite make it all the way down. And at this point, St. Charles is kind of bustling. It's coming into its own. And let me just rewind a bit because to have these mills access the water power, they needed channels. They can't just have the dam running down. It's just water literally wasting. So they have these two huge channels that are drilled in that are 500 feet, and they're used mainly the existing bedrock to funnel their like power generators and the mills and how everything works. These were built between 1841 and 1843. And it was said at the time that it would be like having a 600 horsepower. The dam only produced about 600 horsepower total.
It's a lot.
Oh, it was a lot back then. It was extreme. It was the most efficient way to power anything back then, 100%. But today, when you look at it, yeah, not as much. In the 1840s, as I said, they were growing in industry. You had Butler's paper mill, the Doig file factory, Bingham's foundry that were all using this. And as they're using the river, they're not using it sustainably. They're using this as a perfect way to get rid of trash, to get rid of all their junk. And fortunately and unfortunately, because this is still happening, or not the economic decline, this is not still happening. But St. Charles had a terrible economic turn after a railroad industry kind of went bankrupt. And how do I say this? There was a competitor to the Chicago and Galena Union Railroad called the St. Charles Mississippi Airline Railroad, or Chicago St. Charles, Mississippi. And this railroad was illegally taken over by an agent of the Galena Chicago, and he basically held it for ransom. He said, "You guys are going to dissolve now." Ira Minard was involved with the scandal, and he made all his money back, $400,000 at the time, which was quite a substantial amount. So a lot of people were very upset with Ira Minard as well as the people involved with the railroad. And this really did leave St. Charles in an economic downturn for decades. Aurora and Elgin are both very well known as industrial kind of cities with well-functioning rail lines. And, we were actually the second largest settlement in King County for the longest time. It was us and Aurora, really. But because of this bypass and because of the Chicago Galena, St. Charles took a hit. They became known as the Rip Van Winkle Town later in a Chicago Tribune article. I can't remember when that was from. But by 1871, you finally get your first functional railroad. St. Charles had actually the earliest railroad, but it was a little line that ran from West Chicago back. And that's pretty much where it ran up until 1871. So now you get the Chicago Great Western, which it became. And this adds a lot of industry to the region, and it's around the time of the Industrial Revolution. So you're getting these really toxic, heavy, hardcore industries that are moving into the valley, polluting the river a little bit more. And in order to get people to work in the factories, you need a way to get them to the factories. And this is why the trolley line was established through town. In one of the river Rails to Trails projects, if you ever take the Fox River Trail, that is the old trolley line from the Aurora, Elgin, and Fox River electric line. And this ran from Carpentersville all the way to Montgomery, so out and about, and connected to the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin, which would and took everybody, including my great grandpa, from Chicago out here to St. Charles to work. I actually worked at the cable factory. But again, as I said, industry caused a dying river. This is not something that's eye-opening. Should be something we all kind of understand by now. Despite the pleasant reputation of the area, the amount of dumping effectively killed the ecosystem in the river. There was basically little to no fishing. Fishermen became very distraught and they actually began suing different people. This this created like a series of lawsuits at the turn of the century where a river that was once as clear as a New England brook, meandering from its home in the mountains, became a chain of stagnant mill ponds. In 1912, a gentleman named Edward Gordon of Elgin sent a cease and desist, and he actually contacted the state to get individual towns and municipalities to clean up the river. As you could tell, this is a photo that doesn't really look like the most glamorous part of town. This is where the Equibit statue is now, actually, so where the old police station is here in St. Charles. That was the condensing factory at the time. Here's some fun testimony from that court case. And it showed that in the summer, the river was practically dry and that the cattle were watered from the stream. People would bring their dirty cattle into it. It was used for bathing in warm water, and that thousands of tons of ice were harvested all along the river every year. Witnesses described that the river was very polluted and it was often offensive in smell, and the ice in many places was not clear. Clots of sewage often flowed to the surface, and at times cattle became sick from drinking river water, and in certain places they got sore mouths and ulcers from acid wastes and discharges by factories. So here you have day-to-day people using the river for everything, and everybody in the industries are using it for everything, and it's making people sick, it's getting the cattle sick. It's not a good look. But if you take a look at the picture, you can't see him that clearly, but there's just a gentleman scooping out water for his pails out of the river coming in on his day-to-day business. So on June 14th, the State Game and Fish Conservation Commission entered an order against the towns on the Fox River, which included St. Charles, and they had to stop discharging or permit the emptying of waste into the Fox River. And this created the first sanitary sewer system that ran across the river, luckily. So there's something good that came out of it. And essentially, this was the first improvement that had been made for any sanitation purposes on the Fox River in our region. The old mayor used to say that the municipal waste people would bring back pre-digested tomatoes for him to plant in his garden. So, like, people were using human waste for fertilizer. They were finding new ways to reutilize it, and when it was getting flushed away, it was down the river. So no way of cleaning that at the time either. The study also found that the dams on the Fox River severely interfered with the passage of fish, and this is in 1912. So the report stated that most of the game fish have disappeared, although the state and game fish conservation has closed the river to any but hook and line fishing, and they were trying to gradually build up the stream. One of the results from this was the installation of a fish ladder on the dam in 1918. This still exists today. Hard to see again over there, but it has a tendency to still clog to this day as well. Although it did improve the state of game fishing, I guess, on the Fox River. Oh, and we're talking about how this place is an open sewer. Let's talk about how it's also simultaneously the beauty spot of the Fox River Valley. So despite the severe deterioration in health of the river, St. Charles was marketing itself as the beauty spot of the Fox River Valley. I mean, we are, you go up anywhere around here, you can't deny that it is beautiful. But I guess out of sight, out of mind, when the heat of summer came, it's kind of hard to get it out of sight or mind. But a lot of people came to the Fox River by the thousands. We were the Chicagoland destination, like think of the Wisconsin Dells, but more natural early Wisconsin Dells. So sanitary measures were put in place, but the corporations were still dumping. Like nobody was keeping track. Nobody was actually going to hold them accountable at the time. So while you have this river, which is rather sewage-like, you do have a whole cottage industry blossoming. Potawatomi Park became the first park in Illinois under the National, well, geez, it's so simple, the Illinois Park Act of 1913. And this really kick-started people coming in, being able to enjoy the area. And in the 1910s, a gentleman north, kind of near the Red Gate Bridge, named Claude Alfred Anderson, began to rent cottages out. His farms were, he figured it was going to be a little more beneficial for him to do cottage renting instead of farming on these parcels. And he actually created a music club on his land. So these different people rented out this barn that was very acoustically pleasing to them, and there were a lot of Chicago different groups. And C.A. Anderson noticed that, I'm making more money from this than even renting the cottages. So he established the Pinelands Pavilion, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But it created an industry where even where where Norris Nature Preserve is now, if you actually walk down, you could still see the well from this and two of the houses there that still remain, cement bathhouses, named Rainbow Springs. This was established by the Lester and Delora Norris family, so they're ones that have a lot of philanthropical input to the area. Oh, I accidentally used the same photo here. But the Pinelands Pavilion was like the party area. It was like the secret club that you had to know about. People such as Paul Whiteman, Wayne King, Guy Lombardo, and Vincent Lopez all played at the Pinelands Pavilion. And this would be like having your like top of the line I guess the hot 40 people come to your place in the middle of the woods to dance. The Pinelands Pavilion actually still exists up there. It became known for having gangster activity, allegedly. It just became known as a place to party and let loose when during the age of Prohibition. I know there's next presentation is going to be on the 20s, right? Or something around there. I'm trying to think. But the next in the series. Yes.
How did people get there?
Trolley line.
That's
So
why
the
it was on
trolley
that side of the
line.
river.
Yes, what's very interesting is there was like dozens of stops that were sent up right around the river there. So the Pinelands, you would get off. I believe you could still see the remnants. There's a couple that did a series on the Fox River line on YouTube, and they went down to each stop. And pretty much every like couple blocks there would be a different stop. So if you ran down Route 25 and then kept going up, that's pretty much the trolley line went.
And there was a train from Chicago out then.
Yes, so there was in St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia, and Elgin. There were the transfers. Yeah. So they would come up into St. Charles and then they would come up northwards. But that also caused a couple of raids to occur, none too far into the woods, but definitely in the 20s there was several raids which implicated people who were living in the woods at the time. And while we're thinking about the river and how beautiful it's becoming, quote unquote, with all the tourism and blossoming stuff, people noticed that the dam was falling into disrepair. So Edward Baker, who's, well, I guess that's his son right over there, Henry. We're in the building named after the Rockwell Baker. He became the town's largest philanthropist along with his niece due to their inheritance of the Texaco oil money. So they really inherit John Warren Gates and his son over there, Charlie Gates's fortune, which is about, what was it, 38 million, which is 400 something million. So as a 15-year-old, Delora was the richest teenager in America at the time, and Edward Baker was very well off too as well. And many of the buildings you see today in town, actually, that's our exhibit. So I guess here's my little PR moment. We'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Baker Community Center, this building right here. the Arcata Theater, the St. Charles Community High School, and the National Bank, which was also built by Bakers. So he did all of this. He helped improve the infrastructure of St. Charles by building new brick roads, and he also fixed the dam, which was a huge thing. I paid $5,000 to get it cemented, and the dam has never really been repaired to this extent in its history. It had been repaired in 47, 57, 81, 91, 1912, 1918. And up until that point, there was pretty much just those iron blocks holding everything in together. So they finally cemented it over in 39. They cut out these areas that looked bad with the cracks. They took pneumatic chisels and then they kind of roughed up the surface. They sandblasted it to clean off all the soft spots and chisel off more. Then they nailed in hundreds of dowel and reinforcing rods. And then they blew cement through special pipes onto the dam. So it just kind of be like a goopy little mixture there. Here's a photo of them actually underway. So it's kind of a nice spot. You could see where the dam or how the dam actually looked. In 1918, it was cemented over. Sorry, in 1918, it was cemented over for the first time, but within 20 years, it was already deteriorated to this point. A lot of the riprap, if you could see these crossings on here, these would be like the iron railroad ties that were utilized and then just kind of holding rocks in place. But as they got, and then these rocks and sandbags and everything would fall from the top because that's how you weighed down the different layers in there. So they actually had to go in and lay out different gravel stuff to keep it in place. But after that, the St. Charles Dam was finally good to go. But the 1940s brought some of the lowest water levels, and with war production in full swing, this was not good for the manufacturing industries next to it. So they actually had to install a wood plank across the dam to get enough water flowing over it. And by the 1950s, Geneva's dam had failed, and they actually in 1954 fully replaced it, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on their dam history. I mind my own damn business. No, I'm kidding. But no. They came to an agreement in the 50s where they would share drainage pipes so that the area wouldn't flood as much. But that year, the area flooded due to a blockage of the sewage pipes in St. Charles. So there was actually some of the citizens I've spoken to at the time still remember it, and just it ruined the Hotel Baker's dance floor, so that kind of took out the fun of all the lights moving for a while, up until the 90s, I'm pretty sure. Or not patterns necessarily. You couldn't do like patterns like a turkey or a flag anymore. Now it was just one color or another kind of. And they were the last operators of water power on the Fox River. They had two red, huge electric generators in their basement. A lot of people think that there was a tunnel under the Hotel Baker, but you can't really build a tunnel into bedrock if especially back then. What this really is was the old generator room, which was underneath the storage trophy room. And sometimes trophies would get stuck in the generator, and I've heard stories of the people there try to pull them out and get stuff together. So people are noticing that the Fox River, despite being so beautiful in this region, it still has the smell, it's still being polluted, and now people are taking note that these people aren't being held accountable at all. So one gentleman named, the Fox, his name is Jim Phillips, and he was a school teacher from, I believe it was Montgomery area. He began a personal crusade and became marked as the first eco-terrorist, according to some people. His actions really, he was a man of direct action, so he went to different sewage pipes, he blocked their stuff, he would pour hay, he would pour oats, he would pour cement, anything he could to block this, and he would have back and forth. They would dig it out, he would go do it again. He poured literally 50 gallons of raw sewage from the Fox River onto, I believe, Armour-Dial Corporation's the vice president's office. It was all very, there's a book named literally just Raising Cain Chronicles of the Fox, I believe. I don't know if it's still in publication, but if you could get your hands on it, I know Little Schoolhouse and Oswego sells copies still. That's where I got mine. So. Yeah, definitely worth the read. I mean, it's fantastic.
It's my understanding that John Doerr.
Oh man,
Those places.
that what I could imagine. I wish I got more information. I love John.
History.
Oh
so sad. But
yeah,
Joy might be able to corroborate that, but I'm sure John told me.
Oh, that would be so fantastic to hear because, yeah, John was I mean, honestly, a legend when it comes to conservation and forest preserves around here. And around the same time as the Fox is coming up, people are reutilizing the river. Everyone had always used it for canoeing and stuff, but now people are using it for athletic canoeing, like actual events, boat races, all these different kinds of things are happening. So the Fox using these tactics and with a bunch of other stipulations and crazy stuff. In 1970, the Clean Water Bill was passed by the Nixon administration, which is still wild to say. Or was it? Yeah. Yeah, it was Nixon. So this resulted in the largest cleanup for the Fox River because now some corporations are being held accountable. The EPA gets created as a result of this. It might be a little bit later, I can't remember. But the Fox joins the EPA eventually to become a regulator to work on the inside and try to make things better from that perspective. And he finds that it's just as shady on the inside as it is on the outside, unfortunately. But despite this, normal citizens are finally coming up to clean to kind of take accountability for these places. And people were having protests. People were calling out factories when they were actually offending and polluting. And people wanted to return the river to a place of recreation where they could bathe, they could not bathe, where they could boat, where they could swim and where they could do the stuff they did as kids, but with the safety, with the foresight and knowledge that you're not swimming in a sewer. And this laid the work for Army Corps of Engineers studies to review the impact of dams on the Fox River and to see how they could make these more navigable. So this became the first initial push for the fabulous Fox Rivers trails, which back in the day was called the Paddleway, I believe the Fox River Paddleway. And they were going to install canoe chutes down each dam, essentially, to make it easy for people to get through. Unfortunately, at the time, the city of St. Charles lacked the funding and interest, really, and they kind of let the whole position die. So the canoe chute was never built, and that kind of delayed a lot of progress when it came to navigating the river, building that more accessible, kind of easy way to get around. Like they did install signs that say like portage here. They did do all that and lay the groundwork for that, which is huge. But what it could have been was definitely not met. Behind the scenes, the river was once again in danger. This time, we're learning about the impact of farms, different soils, what's leaching into the river, what's actually being dumped in the river as well still. Pollution had declined exponentially between 1974 and 1994. So the health of the river, in theory, should have been, or the ecosystem should have been improving, but it really wasn't. And I remember as a kid that the Fox River was actually listed as the seventh most endangered river in the in the United States of America. I was given a C rating by the EPA, which is not good. Most people don't get a C rating. An F rating would be, or I don't know what they constitute, but effectively dead river. Yeah. Yeah. And with the knowledge that we have now, and like you said, the next presentation coming up about farmland and potentially what's the word I'm looking for? Just good economic, equitable use of the land, something like that.
Stewardship.
Stewardship, thank you. And during this time, the focus again became on the river, and the city of St. Charles, or whoever owned the dam, finally wanted to get rid of ownership. They needed to repair the dam, which was going to be an expensive project, and they were going to do that in tandem with the Main Street Bridge repairs. So they actually sold the dam to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources in 1996. And I mean, through that whole period, people were debating who really had ownership, who does this. And I believe it was finally declared in 1992 that it was the people on each side of the river that maintained the official ownership and maintenance of the dam. So let's see, Hotel Baker at this time wasn't really in existence. I folded from the Lutheran retirement home, and the municipal building, trying to pay, like the municipal government trying to pay for the dam repairs at the time would have been too much. So they just sold it to the IDNR and they made structural repairs on crumbling parts. And in 2009, they made a $3 million improvement to the sidewall so that people could fish and not be scared to fall in. And recently, as we know, the questions of dams have come up, or the question of dams has come up, and might be fading back into obscurity a little, but in 2023, the United States Army Corps of Engineers completed a 20-year study on the Illinois River system, and that they made the recommendation to remove the dams on the Fox River by 2030, and this includes the one here in St. Charles. Initial meetings had gone all right. I guess the Army Corps of Engineers needed to be a little more informed with the history of the dam. Stuff just fell apart though recently when the Army Corps of Engineers pulled out of the project under new directives. So right now it's kind of in limbo. Some people are trying to see how it could be possible to create a well-funded dam removal thing, because if the dam breaks or if anything like that happens, they said that it's coming up on a year where the renewal for IDNR and they would go back to the city or something like that. So the city would be held for upkeep in that area or something like that. I don't know the whole details, but right now everything's just on a big pause for that. I think people are still discussing it. I know there's people that are still trying to push for new ways to find funding. I just don't know how that's progressing, frankly. But as we could take a look at the example locally, this is the South Batavia Dam, which is literally like right behind my house almost, or apartment almost. And in 2005 and 2006, 2005, the Batavia Dam was removed, and it actually, you could see visual improvement of the flow of water. These were all taken at the same period of time. I mean, different, there's so many different factors that go into it. But just by demolishing the dam, you could tell it's opened up the river. Actually, people are always in that area now, kind of paddling. And this, I'll also talk about a small little dam that was on Fearsing Creek up until 2011, because this just gives an idea of the importance of opening the rivers, in my opinion. I'm not here to position anybody one way or another, just kind of bring up the evidence. Before the dam was removed at Fearsing Creek, only 47 fish were ever found above the head of it from 12 different species. 2 years later, when they removed the dam, 636 fish were found above the head of the dam from 27 different species. So that more than doubled the diversity of the fish species in there. And obviously, you could see 636 fish compared to 47 is a lot more being able to access it. So these split ecosystems have kind of created just a big divide in the Fox River Valley, and if they were reconnected, it would bring things back to how it was essentially. It'd take a long time, but obviously there's a lot in play with that, and this was just a brief history of human interactivity with the river. I hope it just gave you a quick rundown. Let me know if you have any questions, because I'm more than happy to answer those as well, though. But thank you, guys. Oh, yes. Or you first, sorry. Or
Who's first?
you could go first.
Okay, it's my understanding that the Indian Trail,
Mhm.
Native American Trail, is where 31 is now.
Yes, that's another one as well. So Route 31 was a buffalo trail that was one of another indigenous trail eventually. And you were 100% right
Well, I
there.
think they're in Wild Coast.
Oh, yeah. So that whole area is that was actually where a
The other
village was.
thing to talk about the Native Americans in Indian Mound Road and all.
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Do you have some arrowheads and things like that from that area?
Yes, a lot from the Fearsing Creek site and the Potawatomi. There were two indigenous villages on each site, essentially, over the years. And these were those temporary seasonal ones where they would come in the summer. So a lot of people in the 19th century, when they would just walk around kind of Fearsing Creek, they would find them just sticking out. And we have 300 projectile points, I would say. So a fair amount.
One of the neighbors, former neighbors, was talking about how she and her brothers used to pick them up.
Oh, yeah.
And where they're located, and she
Yeah.
said she and her sister were creeped out by her brother.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a few, so.
Yeah.
wanna try, I don't know. if
No,
track
that's
down
always-
those people, but
When it comes to archaeology, the key always is where was it found? That is the big one. Yeah, so
So you're.
yes.
I can give you their name.
Yeah, whatever you want to forward. I always love to learn more about, especially that area because it's got such a long history and then more recent history because of the Wild Rose development and Wild Rose Springs and all that. So please do. I love that. And then a question back there, and then I'll come in.
Pearson Creek had a dam.
Pearson Creek had a minor, just yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, nothing crazy like the 300-foot. Yeah. Creek Bend Nature Center, they had the it's not like a big pond kind of like area that leads around this to where it curves. If that makes sense. Yes.
What would it take to get it, the decision about whether to remove it or keep it as a ballot issue?
Ooh, that's a great question. I have no idea, frankly. I only know that I was asked to come up with like a background on the history of the dam, unfortunately.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I know
That would be a decision of the city council that they could vote to put it as a non-binding referendum on the ballot.
oh yeah.
But it would be non-binding. It would therefore only be an opinion of the voter.
Right. I believe it would have to be because the state still owns the dam.
Maybe, sounds like it might not.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm pretty sure they still.
Yeah, they own it up until they said that, well, now that the Army Corps is pulled out, I don't know what they're gonna say. Like we won't, yeah. One final
It's
thing.
just- So right now the state owns the dam,
Yes.
but it's gonna revert back to the city?
No, not soon at all.
Okay.
That was if the dam project,
Okay.
it's a whole complex
So it's-
thing.
the state's
But
gonna own
they-
the dam
they
for
still
the
own-
foreseeable future.
Yes, essentially, IDN.
Doesn't want to own the dam.
Yes, right.
Right.
It's there.
Yeah.
Through this, if the state has said to each community that we can help you remove the dam, if that's what you would like to do, if you would like to keep the dam,
It's up to you.
that's up to you, but we're going to give you title to the dam and you will inherit all liability and all
There we go.
risk. And that's what each community is weighing. And the Corps of Engineers study was sort of driving that process and setting timelines. And now that leg of the stool has gone out, the third leg being the Fed, so you still kind of have the state and the locals. And we'll see where that all goes.
Then I guess there was one
Right.
final.
But it's my understanding that the Army Corps is not pulled out of the project.
Okay.
It's been paused,
Okay.
like they haven't even gone for funding. So
Well,
they
it's been
still could
paused by
be,
the administration.
pardon me,
It's been paused by the administration.
paused. Not eliminated,
Yeah.
and the state does have money to remove the dams.
Okay.
without the Corps.
They had some.
So with the Carpentersville Dam and the Batavia dams, was it something different about who owned those and how
Yes.
those were able to be dismantled?
Yes, Carpenter Dam was owned and the Lower Batavia Dam were both owned entirely by Forest Preserve District of King County. And they own both banks, so that made it easy, one landowner, their decision. Still needed all the permits, but landowner.
The North Batavia Dam is owned by state right now.
No, I think that one is owned by the city
Mhm.
with a little chunk owned by the Park District. There are a few of the dams that are not owned by the state, the majority are.
Yes, they were.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise,
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.